We have some people joining us just now. Welcome everyone. I'm here with Lucie Bruneau from Voice Found, an agency in Ottawa that helps survivors of childhood sexual abuse and survivors of human trafficking. I'm going to start us off with a land acknowledgement in English. We are in the city of Toronto. Thank you so much for everyone for being here. We acknowledge that the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of the many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Again, thank you everyone for being here. I'm super excited to be here with Lucie talking about boundaries and healing. What are boundaries? How do we set them? What happens when we do? What's this guilt and shame that might arise? I'm super excited to have Lucie here to share her insights with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Lucie. And again, welcome everyone in the chat. If you have any questions, you can post them in the chat. Please be mindful that your name will appear visible to others in the chat, not on social media. And after this session, we do have a brief survey and we'd love your feedback on that as well. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Lucie, who's going to lead us through this lovely workshop.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria. I'm so proud and happy to be a member again of this wonderful conference. I know so much work goes into it. I wanted to start off by talking about the program Strength Found, which is based on the Gatehouse program. And boy, what a year since we launched. It's been quite a year, and we're so proud of all that we've accomplished during this pandemic. Zoom was one of the biggest joys in a sense. I mean, I know we're all tired of Zoom, but wow, the Zoom has taught us that we are able to support people even if they are unable to be in person. And it also opened a window for us to be able to support people that are not just in our little small area of Ottawa, Ontario, but we can expand. We are now supporting people in Montreal and all the way to Newfoundland. So it's quite wonderful. We've also added 2 new peer supporters this past year to help with the program, which is wonderful. I call them my dream team. And over the year, we have served over 100 survivors. And that's quite a big accomplishment for a new program that couldn't really have the marketing that we would have liked to have had going out there in public and talking about it. So it's been a really, we're very, very, very proud. We've now completed 5 female cohorts and 2 male cohorts. We offer the one-on-one services. We have bi-weekly meetings also and monthly groups, along with the 15-week program. And throughout the year, what we did notice is that the mental health was a big challenge for everyone, and that we had a big need, a big void there. And we were very lucky to be able to be funded by a private family foundation in getting the additional supports to be able to support these people that needed that crisis help. And the one other thing that we've noticed throughout the program, looking at the need of our members and that, we created a judicial process, a presentation, which was created by 2 survivors who went through the entire criminal and civil cases. So they were able to share all their experiences, what went well, what went wrong, the resources to use, and all the different avenues that, the process can take, whether it's, worth it or not for everybody, because it's all a very different experience for everyone. Another workshop is a guided discussion on suicidality, because many survivors struggle with suicide ideation and suicide attempts. So we wanted to help additional support, even added on top of all the services that we already have. Another one was sexual intimacy. Sexuality is a big challenge. So we decided to reach out to 2 therapists whose specialty is sexual trauma. And both a male and a female have created these wonderful workshops that we present on a regular basis. Another thing that we do have, we're very lucky, we are now offering MBSR, which has been generously presented by a therapist, who is also a survivor and understands everything that is needed. And that mindfulness is such a powerful thing. Um, and then we have the social activities. So that's been a challenge with the COVID. So, but we wanted to have a safe place for survivors to gather and to be able to be just on the social level, learn to be together again in the safe, confidential area and have fun. Because that's the one thing that we've forgotten as survivors is how to have fun and to be safe with other people. So we had a nice gathering picnic, a graduation picnic for all those that had survived, that were survivors of childhood sexual abuse. We also have, we just had a hockey game. We all attended a hockey game, a bracelet making event, and now we will be doing empower embroidery. So it's been a wonderful year, and I'm so looking forward to everything else that's coming in the future for Strength Found. So, but let's get into boundaries. So we have all heard about boundaries. It seems to be a real big buzzword right now, and how do we, how do we set boundaries and everything else? And it's everybody is challenged with boundaries. And I just want to share with you just an overview of boundaries and the different types of boundaries and why we need them, and why as survivors of sexual abuse we struggle so much with them, and how to release those feelings of shame and guilt that's been, about setting them. So let's start with what are boundaries. So boundaries are limits that we can set. They're a necessity. They're very important, and a very important healthy component for any relationship, whether it be a personal relationship or a professional relationship. So looking at that, you know, what boundaries do, the role of boundaries is they keep the bad elements out of our relationships, which can be manipulation, abuse, cruelty, harassment, all the things that go on. And I really like the expression "good fences make good neighbors." And that's the best ways. If you can't, if you're in the situation of wondering, well, is this a place where a boundary would be, just think about that expression: good fences make good neighbors. Or imagine a bubble. That's the other thing. Imagine a bubble. How would you allow in your bubble? And that's a great way to, another good visual. So the cost of not setting healthy boundaries. So when you don't set healthy boundaries, what happens is that it leaves you uncomfortable. It causes tension in relationships, unsafe, and you're not feeling respected. So this is very important. And I'd like to invite you to just take a minute and think back in a situation when someone did or said something that went against your personal values. Take a moment and think about that. And how did you react? Did you freeze? Did you just feel unpleasant, uncomfortable, not knowing how to say what to do? Or did you just let it slide by because it was so much easier to just let it go by and just say, no, I don't want the confrontation. We've all had situations like that. Is this a moment where I should say something or anything like that? It's really important that you don't want to be alone. And then for us survivors, we've had our emotional, physical, and mental boundaries crossed. We were powerless. We were told that we had no rights and that we had to keep it a secret. So of course we couldn't possibly understand. And then over our lifetime, we've built this behavior that, that we didn't understand the right to be safe and secure, loved and respected. So it's not your fault. So be kind to yourself. And you probably also never had a role model. That's another thing. A role model is very, very important. And not everyone had that experience to have someone in their life, whether it's a family member or a teacher or somebody in our life that could help us understand, that we need that. We need that example. So we were all wrapped up in our shame and our guilt and what we, because of what we'd lived through. So once again, I remind you to please be kind, and you didn't know any different. So now you're an adult. So you do have the capacity to start setting some new and healthy boundaries. So there's many types of boundaries. There are physical boundaries. Don't touch me. Don't come so close to me. The mental and or spiritual. You can't tell me how to think or to feel. Or the emotional ones is I refuse to allow you to make me feel to be upset by you or to make me feel bad about something about myself. Another one is the material or financial one, to have the right to have your own things, your own bank account. Those are all very important things. And before we talk about the different types, the other types, the style of boundaries, pardon me, this is also, I just thought of this morning, as we are entering the Christmas season, how important it is um, to start preparing ourselves, because now we're going to be coming into some pretty stressful situations. We all have gatherings. Christmas is a really, really hard time. So you've got time now to start preparing for that. It's not happening tomorrow. So you've got a good month and a half to start prepping for it. So the different types of boundaries are good, positive boundaries. And this is how I visualize. I always have a visual, positive boundaries to people like this. These are positive boundaries. So this is when two people have a good, healthy relationship. They can go back and forth, and they're very respectful of each other's differences and their needs and everything else. And then there's the collapse boundaries. So imagine two people, they're so intertwined together like that they're not two separate people. You cannot tell who's who and what's what and who's feeling what. Are you feeling for the other person? Or are you feeling for yourself? So that is not a healthy one either. But there's also the other extreme, which is the rigid boundaries. The rigid boundaries is where you isolate yourself completely. Is you do not have communication with other people. You don't allow other people to know your feelings, your thoughts, or anything like that. So that is not, there are times that you need rigid boundaries. There are definitely certain situations that are needed to have rigid boundaries, but it's to know when to shift back into a positive boundary. And the boundaries will flow back and forth in any healthy relationship. And that's something to remember. Now, how to set boundaries. And that is always a really difficult thing for many people, and especially for survivors, because we've been so abandoned and unloved, and it's a big fear for us to not want to cause attention. You don't want to cause conflict. You don't want to be left alone. It's a huge fear that we have. But remember, it's like anything new that we start to practice, we have to start small. And it's like learning to ride a bicycle. When you first got your first bicycle, you didn't get on right away first time and boom, it was all good. Unless you're some very gifted person, but I wasn't. It took a few tries, a few falls, and then I got back on, and it's carry on, and you get really good at it. Next thing you know, you're racing through it. You will do this. You will be able to do this with setting your boundaries. So it's like any skill, start small, practice it, and it will happen. I'll give you an example. I love this. This is a person who'd gone to her regular coffee shop for years and always ordered the same coffee. And one day she didn't get the right order. And she looked at it and decided not to make a fuss for all the reasons we talked about. Didn't want the conflict, didn't feel, oh, whatever, I'll just let it go. This happened 7 times in a row. And we talked about setting boundaries and how, this would be a perfect opportunity for you to start testing it to see how it feels and how does it feel for you and all that. And it'll be very empowering. And on the 8th time she went in and did, correct. The order came wrong, of course, as always. The barista probably didn't even realize she was doing it wrong all this time. She was never redirected. And the lady went ahead and explained that this isn't the coffee I ordered. So it was, please, could I have the coffee I ordered? And there was no problem, no conflict. And she was so empowered by just that small step. It gave her the courage to move on to a little bit more challenging boundary that she would need to set. So this is something like just to give you an example of how to, to start feeling comfortable and not worry, because that's the other thing, is that you're not responsible for another person's feelings or reactions. If anything is done with respect towards the other person, not rudely. Of course, if you do it rudely, and you might get the wrong coffee next time, but with a different reason. So that's where we would start now to think about, before setting your boundaries, you need to do some reflective work. So what are you wanting? And then it's not easy to set boundaries with a loved one or a coworker, as it is with a barista, because you have so much more invested in your relationship with the people in your daily life. So this is where I would say, take a minute to reflect and to recognize some of the signals that your boundaries may have been crossed. So these are good examples. Did I feel discomfort? Did I feel pain? Did I stay around someone because it was easier to just stay, even though what they were saying or doing made you feel uncomfortable, that you didn't want to do anything because you would be disappointing them, that you would feel uncomfortable that they would leave me? Did you say yes when you should have said no? You wanted to say no, but part of you was going, no, it's not worth the problem, it's not worth the issue, I don't want to cause any friction. So this is something that you would need to sit and think and reflect upon when a situation happens. And these self-reflections moments is where you're going to, you want to be able to have the time, and this is something that is very important when you're setting your boundaries, to go back and not deal with it at that moment. We have an expression in French which is à froid and non à chaud. So which is like, not when the moment is heated. This is very important, to not try to set boundaries in a heated moment of a situation, to stand back. So when you stand back, you have time to do this self-reflective work. How did I feel? How did that work for me? I wasn't comfortable with that. And then you can start practicing how you're going to approach the situation, and I always go back to the words, I want to do with loving kindness, so that I'm not coming in an attacking mode, in an angry mode, or hurtful, because the last thing I want to do is to shame that person. I don't want to shame them to feel bad. I want them to understand my needs, what I need out of this, the situation. So this is where it's very important. So one of the first things to do is, when you're talking to someone, to use the I statements. So it is about how I felt. So an example is, I am not comfortable when you stand so close to me. And you don't need to explain why. And this is the other thing, as survivors, I've heard many, many times is, but I don't want to go through the whole story of why I can't stand somebody touching me or being so close to me or hugging me from behind. Many, many things. They always go, but I don't want to tell them the whole story. You don't need to. You don't need to explain. You can if you'd like to, because every relationship is different. It depends on the context of the relationship that you're going to be, trying to set your boundaries with. So that's the important part, to come from a good place, a place of respect and loving kindness. And this will not be easy for the person. It's not everyone can accept, because to be redirected doesn't come easy for everyone. Some people accept it. Some people respect the fact that they had never knew that you were uncomfortable being so close, like they had never known. And they may be very grateful for you to have trusted them and to respect and love the relationship so much that you felt so comfortable that you could redirect that. And at times, it may not go that way, that people would balk, they'll be very uncomfortable, and they will fight you on it, and they will maybe pass judgment and all those things. And that's the important part of that. If that happens, you can always redirect, come back to it. So the three things that are really powerful in setting boundaries is to be assertive, appreciative, and consistent. Because first of all, to be assertive, so you're firm, you're kind, you're respectful, but this is it, this is what your needs are. To be appreciative is to thank them, because this is something that will validate that you validate them in how they've shown respect towards you in respecting your boundaries, and that'll feel very good for them. It brings people closer. And to be consistent, because we're human, we forget. So the person may have forgotten that you don't like to be touched that way or to be so close. They'll need to be remembered, they're reminded. And that's the important part, is just to just gently remind them of, setting your boundaries. Don't excuse it. Just say, oh, but I just want to remind you of this and that, and thank you. And then carry on. If a person does not respect your boundaries and they keep crossing even after being redirected, then that person does not respect your boundaries. And the sad part is they may have never respected your boundaries. You just never had the knowledge prior. Now you do have, you're richer for knowing that that person has crossed the boundary, as painful as it is, and that they do not and probably never did respect your boundaries, that these things happen. And this is the grieving part of the relationship, is that person, you may have to stand back. And this is not easy, and it will happen. And it's okay. It's okay. You deserve to be respected. You deserve to be loved and to be treated with respect. So with that, we don't want to feel shame, fear, or guilt that was pushed upon us, because as survivors, we've struggled with this shame that the abuser had transferred onto us. This is something that you must remember. This is something that you must remember, is it is their shame that they transferred onto you. It is not your shame. It is theirs. And the guilt, that is their guilt. And it's difficult because we've lived with this for many, many, many years. So with this, I invite you to remember your rights as a human being. These were taken away. And now as an adult, you can take charge of your life and your beliefs. I invite you all, if you have any questions, Maria will speak them to me, will pass them on to me, and I'll gladly answer them. And if you would, if you would like to reach me directly, Maria can also post my email address. And then I would gladly, because I know that, putting, as Maria said, that you will lose confidentiality when you're posting a question or a comment. So you're more than welcome to ask me a question privately, and I will gladly respond to you as soon as possible. The sweetness of water.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today, Lucie. There was a question here. Greetings, Lucie. Nice to see you back. Do you think boundaries have become for the better now or harder pre-COVID for survivors of childhood sexual abuse?
I think they're probably harder because we've been so isolated. This is my thoughts. So this is my personal opinion. Now, Maria can also add her thoughts on that right after. But I found that because we were even more isolated. So first of all, as survivors, we do isolate, because of the shame, the guilt, and people don't understand. We don't want the judgment and everything else. And also something else that I've discovered over time was that feeling of dissociation, like you don't quite fit in, you never quite fit in somewhere. And now because of the pandemic, there's been more anxiety, more isolation. Everything has been, I would say, like just brought up to the max, so that we're feeling more isolated, so that and in order to set boundaries, you have to come out of the isolation. So this is where I find that, yes, to answer your question, yes, the pandemic, I feel, has made it. What are your thoughts, Maria?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for sharing that, Lucy. Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. Yesterday, we had Dr. McKinnon, who was talking about moral injury, and part of her presentation, she kind of talked about how the pandemic can mirror some, triggering childhood experiences. And it got me thinking about that just now as the question was posed, right? We're feeling like we're out of control. We don't know what's coming. It's not predictable. We don't know when it's going to end. And doesn't that sound like childhood for survivors?
Mm-hmm.
So we're in this place where it can be difficult to set boundaries, especially around work. Now is so accessible. If you were
Mm-hmm.
working from home, it's one click away, and maybe you can put in more hours. You don't need to do that. Or
Mm-hmm.
you're more accessible. People can reach you by phone. Zoom is portable. They can reach you anywhere. You can be out for a walk and take a Zoom call, right? So you have to be
Mm-hmm.
mindful of those kinds of things. How do you get out? Oh, here's a good question. I know this is a big question. It truly is, but I really appreciate the person asking it. How to start? How do how do you let go of rigid boundaries? So this is a good one, and I struggle with these myself. So I can respond to that with a personal example. And I want to thank Arthur Lockhart for teaching me that. Thank you,
Yeah.
Lucy and Ria. Thank you so much, Stuart. So how do you let go of rigid boundaries, Lucy? What are your thoughts? And then I'll share mine.
Oh, yeah, rigid boundaries. Yes, those are hard ones. We all have that. We struggle with that. I mean, I have that. I have certain relationships where, it's easier to just like shut down, not even going to go there, you know. And this is the part that we have to, the self-reflective work comes back, and I do struggle with that also. Like, there's some pretty close people in my life that I've had, and not that I've had, but I had to stand back, but I didn't take that next step, which is, and I am in the process with one of the relationships that this happened. I went into full lockdown, like boom, like they're like this. The boundaries are like this. There's no communication. I think that I have to sit down and I have to go through and decide this relationship. How much do I value this relationship? Is it an important relationship? Did this relationship bring goodness in my life? Is it something that I value? Is this person someone that I value and that I respect? And if those answers are yes, then I have to find the goodness within me, that kindness and that compassion for myself, because it's got to come from me first before I can address that relationship. And sometimes I find that writing it out is easier. I think journaling, writing an email that you're not sending right away, because sometimes we can get very emotional in it, and not that emotions shouldn't be in that moment, but it really has to come from a place where, you know, I want that friendship. I want that relationship, and the boundaries were crossed, and I should have set those boundaries, and I didn't. And that's okay. That's the past. I'm in the present now. I'm going to move forward. I will address my errors, and that's the one thing. The I statement. This is where it comes in. I failed to set those healthy boundaries, and this I find is the result of everything else, the flow of how the whole relationship and the conflicts happened and all that. So it all comes back to self-reflective work. And your thoughts, Maria?
So true. Thank you for sharing that, Lucy. We have a more specific. How can a person let go of rigid boundaries to start a relationship? So in terms of boundaries, like you're setting the limit. So it sounds like the limit right now is avoiding a relationship or the possibility of one. What do you need? I would like bouncing off what you said in terms of personal self-reflection. What do you need from relationships, especially when your past relationship has been what maybe unhealthy or abusive, or various boundaries are violated? So it's important to look at what is it that you need And it's okay to want these things as well, like to want a partner that's supportive, to want friendships that are authentic and vulnerable and real, and not have people like taking advantage of you, for example. What are the consequences if you stick with this rigid boundary for you in your life? What's going to happen if you don't be vulnerable and put yourself out there? You will probably stay single or not have a lot of friendships. Are you okay with that? There's nothing wrong with being single, by the way. I just know that there's this immense pressure in social society that you have to be paired up with someone, right? Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to be in a relationship romantically with people to be a worthy human being. You already are worthy. So it's
Yes.
really important to take a look at what has happened to you in the past, in terms of past relationships. Past behaviors can be predictive of future behaviors, but if you're doing the self-reflective work and looking at what do you need from relationships, what are you contributing, what do you want to be given back to you in those relationships, and what limits can you set around those relationships or friendships, whatever they may be, then it's a really good place to start. And also having support, like attending peer support groups, having a friend that you can talk to, or your psychotherapist if you have one, to talk about what's happening for you. Because oftentimes what's going on up here is not the reality, right? Like, people are not rejecting you. Maybe they're just busy or doing something else with their time, and it's not about you specifically. So really important to look at what thinking patterns are happening in your head that are helpful to you, and which ones are
Yeah.
not helpful, and how do we change those with self-reflection, with dialogue with others. So I hope that responds to some of the questions there. All right, we have another one. If the other also has a boundary issues, be why they can't respect my boundaries, so maybe not judge them either. True, so true. Sometimes, you have two survivors that are drawn to each other, whether it's friendship, romantic, or work related. It's important, again, to look at what your boundaries are. Obviously, you don't have control over the other person, but you can certainly explore what's right for you and start from there. And I love what you said, Lucy. Don't over-explain. Over-explaining is a trauma response.
Yes.
So we don't
Oh,
need to
yes.
explain ourselves all the time. We don't need to tell every single detail of our story
No.
to be accepted.
No. Yeah.
Really important.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we do that a lot. We just, well, because, and maybe, and I don't know, I mean, I cannot speak for males, but, and it would be powerful if somebody that is a male could add to that. But I find that females, we tend to explain everything. Like, we have to explain everything in great detail. It's a defense mechanism almost. So I think that's powerful. Yeah, it's okay. Don't have to explain all the
So true,
details.
Lucy. And we've had male survivors in our groups that have the same trauma response, over explaining, trying to justify things or minimizing things, but explaining. So you don't have to explain yourself. You're worthy of being here. You're worthy of being alive and contributing. Just a couple of comments on here. Such a good point. The feelings of trauma are mirrored with the pandemic. Sometimes the moral injury is more prevalent because of the barriers presented in the pandemic. It can be hardest to put boundaries up with people we care about, and those close with when we set those boundaries. How is the best way to cope with the aftermath or the shifts? I mean, we're all in this together. We're all going through it in one way or another. And I would start with those connective feelings. Like, I know it's isolating for you, and I feel it, similarly to you. If you're saying no to a friend who wants to go for a walk every day or wants to call you every day, kind of thing. I need some time for myself. And, like, it's okay to say that. It's okay to say, I need some time for myself. I can't be on the phone all the time. And I know what I hear you, and I know what you're feeling, but I hear you. I hear that you're feeling isolated, might be helpful to connect with others in our friend group, kind of thing. So just, stick with your boundary. You cannot control the aftermath. You cannot
No.
control the feeling of rejection that person might feel, or they might get angry with you. Really, it's look at yourself. That's the only person that you do have some sort of control over. Boundaries for men has changed to any degree. Do you think they have shut down more in terms of male survivors? So Lucy, if you want to respond to that, and then I'll share from the.
Could you repeat it again?
So boundaries for men has changed. Do you think boundaries for men have changed to any degree? Do you think that they have shut down more? And I'm assuming that's as a result of the pandemic. If that person, Stuart, if you can clarify that.
Yeah.
And then someone else was saying those are really great questions. Thank you. I so relate to the over explaining. Yeah, that was me a few years back, like having to
Yeah.
justify what I was saying. I had to prove
Absolutely.
it, right? Like
Absolutely.
you don't have to prove anything, by the way.
Absolutely.
And one of the ways that and I thanked Arthur Lockhart earlier in this presentation was when I first came to the Gatehouse, I had very much black and white thinking, like it has to be a certain way or no way, right? Like 0 or 100. And
Yeah.
sometimes that way of thinking still exists within my being. And but he did a few things like during conferences, or he would say it can just be whatever it is, right? And I'm like, but I don't like that. I need some sort of structure. I need some sort of A to Z process. And I'm like, it doesn't have to have that, right? So immersing yourself in situations that are safe, but will test the discomfort of the rigidity of what's you think in your mind is the right thing to do. So I really like that example you gave with the coffee, someone having to say, no, that's not the coffee I ordered, right? Standing up for themselves really after 7 times of going
7 times,
you know, accommodating that person, accommodating other people's needs, and her own were being set aside, right? So Rudy is saying yes regarding the pandemic. So do you think that men's boundaries have changed to any degree? Have they shut down more as a result of the pandemic?
I find that boundaries. Okay, I'll stand back and go back to. I find that because we've been so isolated, and that was something that I read about how people, because when we all started to work from home, what's happened is that we have our boundaries are too loose, too collapsed, because we're from home. Oftentimes we're talking from our home, our residence, our safe place, and that it's been proven through these studies throughout the past year, with being on Zoom or phone calls from the at home and all that, that people have gotten a little bit too comfortable, and maybe the boundaries have, kind of collapsed that way. And with the men that I have supported, I haven't encountered that so much, maybe a couple of times, but, redirecting, it's good, but it's also, we haven't had very many in-person meetings so far, especially the men's group, only some of the social events. So for me, I wouldn't feel really knowledgeable enough to share about that, but I will look into it and get back to you if you want to email me and share me your, I could share that. I can do more research on that and share that with you.
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing, Lucie. From our perspective, we find that men are having a hard time with the Zoom platform, having a hard time with the digital world in terms of connecting. They're already socialized to be shut down emotionally, and now they have, there's the availability of the group online, but there's already that barrier of not being able to share vulnerability or vulnerably with other men already. It's not taught to them, whereas women are socialized differently. Like we're emotional, we have feelings, those are honored, things like that, whereas men are not. So it's I think that's made it a little bit more difficult, the technology aspect, for men to reach out and get support. There's another really good question here that I want to get to. Can you explain more on the grieving process of people that consistently don't respect our boundaries, and therefore no contact has to be set in place? I have a very hard time accepting since my own parent. Thank you. Looks like a rigid boundary has been set with a parent, doesn't respect the boundaries of the child.
And the grieving, this is the hard part. This is a very, very difficult part, especially when it's so close. If it's a coworker, it's okay. We can let that one, you figure we'll be able to work socially, at least, that social graces, we can have that. But when it's that close, it's very, very painful. It is very painful. And if you had to set those very rigid boundary, then power to you for for recognizing your own needs and that your self-respect, because it comes down to your self-respect and your rights as a person. And it's the grieving process. It's not an easy one, but in time, um, it may be easier to accept as time flies. I mean, time flies by. I mean, sorry, I didn't mean it quite lightly. It's not light because it's very, very challenging when it's someone that is so close to you. Maybe in time it can be reapproached. I don't know, because everybody's experience is different. But if you are not respected by that parent, your values are not respected and all that, and there cannot be not that there should be a compromise on boundaries. There should not be a compromise, but if there could come an understanding, which is what you would love to have with anybody, is to have an understanding and maybe come to a place where you can have a bit of a conversation again, open that door, and yet it may not happen. And that's the hard process. And you have to go through the entire grieving process. I hope that helps.
Thanks for sharing, Lucie. I have another comment. My sponsors told me that no is a complete answer. That was a complete sentence. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, I like that. No, no, no. And it's true. It all depends on the relationship of the person that you're dealing with. Some people, no is what they need to hear. They don't hear the I don't feel comfortable. You've explained it, and then it's like, no, no is the final.
All right. All right. So I have another comment here. Whenever people call it sharing, when I've been in group, it's never felt like sharing. Why is it even called sharing? That word is used in French. It's disclosing something. I never know what I want to say. I have no voice, always looking for help, but can't connect with my own voice, my own thoughts. Had therapy with a therapist, tells me what I mean. I don't have my own words. I overshare. I shut down. So maybe when a therapist is asking, what do you mean by that? They're asking for clarification, not necessarily trying to reword or reframe anything that you've said. So that it's quite common for therapists to ask, can you share what you mean by that? They're really wanting to hear more about what your interpretation in your voice, your perception is of the sharing or the disclosure or the story or your narrative, whatever feels right for you. And maybe Lucie, if you can comment on that as well, please.
Yeah, sharing. Yeah, to understand exactly, to clarify the situation in the sharing, and that sharing is yeah, I hear that a lot. I talk too much, I share too much, and all that. And this is where I often will just remind people to take the pause before they speak. Sometimes because sometimes it just happens, and when we start, and it just whoa, and then it's like, whoop, but I spilled too much at that moment, and I didn't want to. So be kind to yourself. It's okay. Just take a moment and pause, because that's when it happens. I find that I will overshare if I haven't taken that moment. That moment to just sit down and pause and just take a breath. And in that moment of breathing is when we can, think about the next step, the next sentence I'm going to say. How much do I want to share? How much I do want to say? So that I hope that helps.
Exactly. Thank you, Lucie. And also, what are you hoping to get out of the process, right? Whether that's therapy or individual peer support or group support, what is it that you need from that process? And what are some things you can do for yourself to self-soothe as you're going through that? Because disclosing, sharing, a piece of you can be overwhelming, to say the least. Dr. Brene Brown talks about is as a vulnerability hangover, right? The next day you're like, oh my God, I feel so exposed, right? So that's where self-care can be so crucial to helping you feel okay again. Yeah. Yes. Thanks for asking.
And thank you. And the one good thing, the one important thing is that boundaries is a great form of self-care. And that's something that we forget. Setting our boundaries is we're taking care of ourselves, of our needs. and not someone else's. So with that in mind, I know that we are flying through, and I didn't get a chance to speak in French, and I'm going to whiz through the French the French presentation. I'm so pleased to have all this, everybody asking questions, and I thank you so much. But I do want to give our French participants a chance to hear my presentation in French. So I'm going to just whiz through that because we've only got 15 minutes. Soyez les bienvenus. Je suis tellement heureuse d'être ici et j'aimerais premièrement commencer par reconnaître le territoire d'ici à Ottawa sur lequel nous sommes réunis. C'est le territoire traditionnel non cédé du peuple algonquin Anishinaabe. Les Algonquins vivent sur ce territoire depuis des temps immémoriaux. Nous sommes reconnaissants d'avoir l'occasion d'être présents sur ce territoire. Alors, on va discuter aujourd'hui, durant cette présentation, vous donner un aperçu général sur quelles sont les limites et les différents types de limites. Pourquoi nous avons besoin et pourquoi c'est-il difficile pour les survivants d'abus sexuels pendant l'enfance de fixer des limites saines et de se libérer des sentiments de honte et de culpabilité qui les accompagnent. Que sont les limites? Les limites, ce sont des frontières que vous pouvez fixer. Ce sont une nécessité, une composante saine dans toutes les relations, qu'elles soient personnelles ou professionnelles. Les limites aussi servent dans notre vie, à écarter dans notre vie les mauvais éléments tels que la manipulation, le harcèlement, les abus et la cruauté. Et moi, j'aime bien utiliser l'expression anglophone que de bonnes clôtures font de bons voisins. Alors, vous pouvez vous imaginer une bulle. Alors, dans votre bulle, qui voulez-vous que croise cette bulle? On ne veut pas tout le monde dans notre bulle. On doit être très particulier. Qui a le droit? Alors, si vous ne fixez pas vos limites saines, alors vous vous sentirez mal à l'aise et vous provoquerez des tensions dans vos relations. Vous ne serez pas en sécurité et vous ne serez pas respecté. Et j'aimerais prendre une minute, que vous preniez une petite minute pour réfléchir à un événement dans votre vie, dans votre quotidien, un événement où quelqu'un aurait dit quelque chose qui allait à l'encontre de vos valeurs personnelles, alors, ou une action. Alors, prenez ce moment-là et pensez, comment avez-vous réagi? Avez-vous été blessé? Avez-vous pris un recul? Avez-vous juste simplement laissé la situation passer? Parce que c'est tellement plus facile de simplement prendre un petit recul, dire, oh, laisse faire, ça va être correct, tout va se mettre en place. Non, c'est pas bien. Alors, c'est là qu'on commence, qu'on doit se remettre à pied et reconnaître que on a nos droits comme survivants, comme êtres humains, d'être respectés et aimés. Et comme enfants, nous avons nos limites émotionnelles, physiques et mentales ont été franchies par notre abus. Nous étions impuissants à nous protéger et nous ne savions pas que nous avions des droits et nous devions garder ce secret. Alors, bien sûr, on a dû comprendre au cours de notre vie que nous avons le droit d'être aimés et respectés et que c'est l'agresseur qui nous a appris et nous n'avons peut-être jamais eu aussi de modèle, hein, que ce soit une famille, de votre famille, si vous aviez quelqu'un dans votre famille qui était un modèle idéal, comment ressemble une limite personnelle. Oui, très saine. Alors, on s'est resté renfermé dans notre honte et notre culpabilité parce que d'après ce que nous avions vécu. Alors, s'il vous plaît, je vous invite à être gentil avec vous-même et vous ne connaissez rien d'autre. Ce n'était vraiment pas votre faute. Ça, c'est quelque chose que je veux vraiment bien souligner, c'est que vous n'aviez aucun contrôle sous ceci et que c'est très important d'être très très gentil, très doux avec vous-même. Et maintenant que vous êtes adulte, vous avez la capacité et de commencer à fixer de nouvelles limites saines. Alors, il y a différentes frontières, des limites. Il y a la physique qui veut dire, oh, tiens-toi pas si près de moi, je suis pas à l'aise. La mentale, spirituelle, vous n'avez pas le droit de me dire comment je devrais se sentir ou émotif. Je refuse de me mettre, d'être bouleversée par toi. Alors, regardez quel style de frontières sont-elles ce que vous avez. Est-ce que vous avez des frontières positives? Et celles-ci sont les frontières positives, j'aime les visualiser comme celles-ci. Alors, c'est deux personnes qui sont bien rapprochées, qui vivent sainement. Ça, c'est des belles frontières positives. Alors, des limites positives, pardon. Alors, où elles sont effondrées? Alors, effondrées, pardon, serait complètement rattachées comme ça. On ne peut pas discerner une personne de l'autre. Elles sont complètement enlacées ensemble. Et ou à l'autre, celle qui est rigide. Alors, c'est la limite où vous êtes complètement à part, vous vous isolez complètement, ce qui est vraiment, des fois, on a besoin d'avoir des limites très rigides, mais souvent, elles peuvent nous faire plus de tort que du bien. Alors, c'est là que je vous invite à regarder ce que vous vivez et puis les différentes relations aussi vont avoir différentes limites. Ça, il y a aussi ça qu'il faut garder. Alors, des fois, on a besoin d'avoir des limites rigides, mais il y a d'autres fois qu'on a besoin de comprendre que c'est comme une vague. Ils vont revenir et repartir et s'enlacer et revenir à des limites très saines. Comme ils disent, les limites ils vont couler en arrière et en avant. Mais maintenant, on va commencer à parler je vais juste vérifier notre temps, comment établir des frontières. Donc, comme toutes les nouvelles choses qu'on commence dans notre vie à pratiquer, il faut commencer très petit. Que ce soit avec, un bon exemple, c'est le vélo. Quand vous étiez tout petit, vous avez appris à conduire votre vélo. Ce n'était pas en montant la première fois que vous avez eu la chance de partir, à moins que vous avez eu de la chance et que vous avez eu ça a marché du premier coup, mais pas pour moi. Ça a pris plusieurs fois avant d'être à l'aise. Alors, c'est comme ça, c'est comme n'importe quoi dans notre vie. Il faut commencer tout petit. J'aimerais vous donner un exemple d'une dame que je connais qui a décidé de commencer à établir une frontière. Puis je vais vous donner son exemple. Elle allait régulièrement à un petit café et c'est un café régulier. Elle commandait toujours son même petit café. Et puis malheureusement, la barista a fait une gaffe, lui donnait le café qui n'était pas le sien. Mais évidemment, elle ne voulait pas causer de scène ou, tu sais, on a une petite gêne, on veut pas confronter. Alors, elle a laissé ça glisser. Alors, ça s'est reproduit 7 autres fois. Et puis, à la 8e fois, on avait déjà parlé ensemble comment commencer à placer, comment approcher la situation, que ce serait une opportunité parfaite pour elle de commencer à pratiquer. Alors, la 8e fois, elle est arrivée et elle lui a présenté le café qui était encore pas la bonne saveur qu'elle avait demandé. Et à ce moment-là, elle a redirigé poliment la barista que ce n'était pas son café et qu'elle préférait avoir le café qu'elle a commandé. Et depuis ce temps-là, tout va très, très bien pour elle avec son café. Mais ça lui a permis de se sentir forte. Elle manquait cette confiance et cette force pour approcher la prochaine frontière qui serait un plus grand défi pour elle avec la famille ou avec le voisin ou n'importe quel. Alors, c'est de commencer tout petit. Et commencer tout petit, c'est très, très important. Alors, je voudrais aussi parler en commençant pour établir vos frontières, j'aimerais que vous pensiez comment est-ce que vous allez vous aborder la situation. Puis ça, j'aime bien l'expression de bien aborder la frontière ou la situation ou la limite que vous voulez placer, de le faire à froid et non à chaud. parce que c'est pas dans un moment de la crise ou de l'événement émotif, parce que à chaud, on est émotif, la réaction va pas venir d'un endroit positif ou bien de soi-même. Alors, c'est bien de prendre un recul et de reconnaître que mes frontières, mes limites ont été croisées. Et là, je dois m'asseoir et analyser, parce que c'est vraiment de prendre le temps d'analyser comment on se ressentait à ce moment-là, et puis tout ça. Et puis, et lorsqu'on adresse la personne, de toujours parler avec le je. Alors, de cette façon-là, la personne ne sentira, peut-être va se sentir, vous n'êtes pas responsable. Ça, c'est une autre chose très importante. Vous n'êtes pas responsable pour les émotions d'une autre personne. Vous êtes seulement responsable pour les vôtres. Alors, c'est à ce moment-là que vous devez vous asseoir et réfléchir, pratiquer comment vous allez aborder vos phrases. Et ce serait, je ne suis pas confortable lorsque tu es si proche de moi. Et vous pouvez recommencer et réétablir la frontière si la personne la recroise, la frontière. Parce que malheureusement, on est tous humains, on oublie et puis on veut donner le doute à cette personne-là qu'elle a simplement oublié et la rediriger. Mais ça doit venir d'un endroit d'amour, d'amour et de charité envers soi-même et envers l'autre personne. Et quand ça vient de cet endroit-là, dans un calme, il y aura moins de chances de blesser l'autre personne parce que malheureusement, personne n'aime être redirigé et ça peut blesser quelqu'un. Si la personne, après que vous avez réétabli la frontière qui a été croisée, recommence, ceci indique que cette personne-là, malheureusement, ne respecte pas vos limites et peut-être n'a jamais respecté vos limites. Et c'est là qu'on doit commencer notre deuil pour la relation. Et c'est une étape très, très difficile. On ne sera pas aimé par tous et c'est très difficile d'accepter ça. Mais malheureusement, c'est le fait de cette situation. Vous avez le droit d'être respecté. Vous avez le droit d'avoir des limites. Vous avez le droit de vivre en sécurité et de vivre en santé. Soyez sûr de vous. Et c'est ce que j'aimerais juste souligner avec ceci, c'est soyez assertif, reconnaissant et cohérent. Alors, lorsque vous placez votre limite, soyez très assertif, et reconnaissant aussi à la personne, surtout lorsqu'elle a respecté vos limites. Remerciez la personne pour avoir, et ça va valoriser à la personne et aider votre relation et être très cohérent lorsque vous expliquez vos limites. J'espère que ceci vous a donné une chance de comprendre. How are we doing? Okay, I'm doing good. Okay. They like the switch. Hein? J'aimerais terminer, parce que je sais qu'on est très proche de la fin, mais j'aimerais vous rappeler de vos droits, en fait, d'être humain. Vous avez le droit d'être autonome. Vous avez le droit maintenant de prendre charge de votre vie et de vos croyances. Si vous avez des questions, Maria avait mis mon adresse courriel dans la messagerie à un point. Je l'invitais à la remettre si elle est disparue. Et puis, je vous invite à m'envoyer un courriel avec vos questions. Il me ferait un grand plaisir de vous répondre. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Lucie, for being here today and sharing all that you've shared on boundaries and responding to everyone's questions or comments. And like Lucie mentioned, her email is in the chat. It's lucie@voicefound.ca, and I will post it. You're getting merci beaucoup in the chat. Wonderful. And spirits and presentation. Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Lucie, and your whole team at Voice Found for what you're doing to help survivors find their voice, find healing and community. And again, feel free to reach out to Lucie. I'm going to post your email on our social media pages as well, in case anyone wants to contact you via there, and
thank you.
Follow you on social channels as well. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. This concludes the 11th annual Transforming Trauma Conference with over, I believe, 18 speakers this year and 12 workshops hosted this week alone. You can find these workshops and Lucie's talk on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com/gatehouse, it's saved on there. It's saved on our Facebook page and on Stuart's Twitter at Got to Get Out of. I retweeted with the Gatehouse and tagged Voice Found on there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Christina. Thank you, Lucie and Maria, for everything you do. Thank you so much as well for being here and sharing your insights with us, Lucie. So ever grateful to you.
Thank you.
Have a safe and wonderful rest of your afternoon and a lovely weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.